This week on Jerusalem Dateline, escalation in the Promised Land as Hamas launches scores of rockets deep into the heart of Israel, how the Israeli military is responding. Plus, we'll hear from Israeli government advisor Dore Gold to understand why Israel needs to protect its people. And we'll take you to the bomb shelter capital of the world, a place here in Israel that's been nicknamed Rocket Town. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you from south of Tel Aviv. And behind us is an Iron Dome anti-missile battery. Israel right now is about 4 or 5 days into what they call Operation Protective Edge. Here's a look back of how it started and where it's going. Israeli police arrested 6 Jewish suspects in connection with the murder of 16-year-old Mohammed Abu Qadir. The murder sparked Arab rioting in Jerusalem and northern Israel. In Jerusalem, rioters destroyed segments of the new light rail train tracks and some stations. This video shows Mohammed being pushed into a car. Police found his charred body a short time later in a Jerusalem forest. An autopsy showed he had been burned alive. Israeli leaders condemned the murder.
We shall not cover anything. We shall discover all the people that have acted criminally against somebody else. Killed, kidnapped, tortured, and on that we shall not make any compromise.
Adding fuel to this combustible atmosphere, this video shows Israeli police beating Mohammed's cousin, 15-year-old Tariq Abu Qadir, an Arab-American citizen, during protests. Israel says it opened an investigation into the incident.
Where did you go to? Like the first part of Shafat, like in the front of Beit Hanina. Yeah. Yeah, and then they came attack me and I woke up in the hospital.
If the policeman brutally beat a boy, that is illegal in Israel and all over the world. And if this is indeed the case, they will be brought to justice.
As the mourning continued for Mohammed, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke by phone to his father. He said, "I would like to express my outrage and that of the citizens of Israel over the reprehensible murder of your son. We denounce all brutal behavior. The murder of your son is abhorrent and cannot be countenanced by any human being." Israel's Shin Bet, meanwhile, announced it had arrested one of the terrorists involved in the kidnap and murder of the Israeli teens. That drama tormented the nation for 18 days until the boys' bodies were found. Over the past few weeks, more than 200 rockets have slammed into southern Israel from Gaza. Sirens have been heard in Tel Aviv and near Jerusalem. That puts nearly 2 million Israelis in rocket range. The front line of this battle is Gaza City. Israel says it's hit dozens of Hamas targets to stop the rockets into Israel. For Israelis living under the shadow of these attacks, it can be terrifying.
Even when everything seems to be quiet, you have to be ready from your inside that maybe in a couple of minutes you will hear the alarm and then you have 10 seconds to save your life, to run to a shelter, and it's crazy.
We definitely expect this to escalate. We should be expecting today sirens going off, I would say, in Tel Aviv region.
Noam Badin of the Sderot Media Center says there's a major difference between the way Hamas fires its rockets and how Israel responds.
Hamas are firing these rockets towards the civilian populations in the western Negev or Israeli population in southern Israel. When Israel tries to retaliate, it uses the most advanced technology and air forces with the purpose to pinpoint that target itself in Gaza, never the population.
Israel's Air Force commander estimates Hamas has fired 97% of their rockets out of population centers. The U.S. State Department said Israel has the right to defend itself, and we certainly support that. So far, Operation Protective Edge has been somewhat successful, and Israelis are hoping and praying the IDF can silence those rockets coming out of Gaza. Here's some of what they've been going through. Israelis in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem ran for shelter as sirens warned of incoming rockets from Gaza. Terrorists launched a salvo of 45 rockets at major Israeli cities, reaching as far as the coastal town of Hadera, north of Tel Aviv. That's about 70 miles from Gaza, further north than ever before. The missile was the same kind that Israel intercepted earlier this year on a shipment from Iran to the Gaza Strip. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said no other country would endure such a barrage of rockets. He said in recent days, Hamas terrorists have fired hundreds of rockets at Israel civilians. No other country lives under such a threat, and no country would accept such a threat. Israel will not tolerate the firing of rockets on our cities and towns. Israel said it tried to negotiate a ceasefire.
We tried to de-escalate. Messages were sent. We told Hamas to stop this rocket fire, but they continued. And now we are acting. The Israeli Defense Forces are acting to bring about a situation where the people of Israel no longer have to live in fear.
Meanwhile, the government authorized the IDF to call up as many as 40,000 reserve soldiers if needed. A smaller amount have already been called up as Israel mulls a ground invasion into Gaza. It remains to be seen whether that ground invasion will take place, but Israeli officials say all options are on the table. And as Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Ron Dermer told CBN News, the situation for Israelis is intolerable.
We've got about 3/4 of our population that had to go into bomb shelters. So to put that in American terms, and you're talking about over 200 million Americans who'd have to go in bomb shelters. Now, what do you think the American people would want their government to do, the American military to do, if they were faced with rocket attacks from a neighboring territory where 200 million people are rushing into a bomb shelter?
Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system has reportedly had a success rate of about 90% so far in shooting down those Hamas missiles. Israel continued its campaign to destroy Hamas rockets and the infrastructure to manufacture those rockets. The IDF reported more than 100 underground missile launches were hit and a number of houses used by Hamas leaders. One senior security source said not a single Hamas brigade commander has a home to go back to. In Gaza, more than 50 Palestinians have died so far in the conflict. Yet to avoid civilian casualties, Israel employs a policy of warning Gazans. They call it the knock on the door, by calling civilians to leave a home or area before they strike. Hamas seems to be putting their own citizens into harm's way. They instructed their people to ignore IDF phone calls. The phone calls are Israel's way to protect the people of Gaza so they can get out of harm's way before a building is about to be targeted. Ron Prosser, Israeli ambassador to the UN, explained the difference between Israeli actions and Hamas's tactics.
Israel is using precision strikes to avoid harming civilians. But Hamas is exploiting our concern for human life by hiding in Palestinian homes, schools, and mosques, and using a Palestinian hospital as the headquarters.
Hamas also calls on Palestinians to gather on top of buildings about to be targeted, so Israel won't hit that target. This IDF video shows they didn't hit the building because of the people. Israel entered the fourth day of its Operation Protective Edge by striking more Hamas targets within Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned the operation to rid Hamas of its ability to fire rockets may take a long time. But some analysts believe Israel's military campaign also sends a signal to Iran. While Western leaders might be willing to tolerate a nuclear Iran, Israel knows Iran with nuclear weapons poses an existential threat to the Jewish state. The IDF's massive air campaign may be showing Iran it's capable of mounting the kind of large-scale air campaign necessary to destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure. But for now, Israelis have been running to bomb shelters throughout Israel, including Jerusalem.
Luckily, the IDF's Iron Dome intercepted the rockets en route and took out the threat.
This Iron Dome anti-missile battery just outside of Ashkelon and others throughout the country are Israel's first line of defense. Without the success of this joint U.S.-Israel project, it's likely dozens of rockets would have been falling on Israel's cities and towns. It makes Israelis feel safe.
It really changed the feeling of the citizen in Israel.
So far, Hamas has fired nearly 600 rockets into Israel, and now millions more Israelis are in range than ever before. One way Israelis have begun dealing with the situation is by installing a free app on their smartphones called Red Alert. It tells in real time where a rocket is heading so they can get out of harm's way. And Christians around the world have begun using it, so when they hear sounds like this, or like this, they can pray for protection for those in harm's way and pray for the overall situation. On the diplomatic front, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called a number of world leaders and said no other government would tolerate this kind of rocket fire. Netanyahu and Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon said the operation would not be over quickly. Meanwhile, more reservists are being called up within Israel as it prepares for a possible ground invasion. Up next, CBN News' Julie Stahl talked with former Israeli Ambassador Dore Gold about Israel's response to Hamas rockets. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. Earlier this week, CBN News' Julie Stahl met with former Israeli Ambassador to the UN Dore Gold about his views on Operation Protective Edge.
Dr. Dore Gold, you are the former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations. You are the president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs and currently the senior advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Welcome to Jerusalem Dateline.
It's good to be here, Julie.
We want to maybe start by asking you about what's going on in Gaza, Operation Protective Edge. Why did Israel launch this operation?
Well, anyone who was watching the news last night in Israel observed that 80 rockets were fired by Hamas into Israel itself. And that is an intolerable situation. The Hamas is not determined to hit military targets. The Hamas specifically aims at Israeli civilian areas, at towns, at villages, at cities. And at present, with the range of their rockets improving, Hamas has managed to force 1 million Israelis into shelters. The government of Israel will not tolerate that situation continuing.
What's Israel's goal in this operation? What do you want to accomplish with this?
In this kind of a situation, the goal is very simple. Bring the rocket fire to a halt. There's nothing that justifies the use of violence against Israeli civilians, like what the Hamas is doing. And therefore, we will do everything in our power to bring this rocket war, which has been imposed on Israel, to an end.
Do you think Israel, they've already done dozens, maybe scores of airstrikes, some strikes from the sea. Do you think they'll mount a ground operation?
Well, while Hamas aims its weapons at Israeli civilians, it takes its civilians and mixes them with its military capability, which puts a very tough burden on Israel how to strike at the Hamas military capacity without killing innocent civilians. But nonetheless, it may be that air power alone will not bring Hamas to a halt. And in that case, the government will have to consider what other alternatives are available. Yeah,
that's pretty amazing. That's what I heard, that Israel destroyed 4 homes in Gaza, but they warned the people to get out first?
That's exactly correct. I mean, what do? Let's say there are homes in the Gaza Strip, and in the basement and in the living room, there are Iranian-manufactured rockets. Do you say, well, wait a minute, we can't strike at that house, even though under international law, that's a legitimate military target? So you say what? That your civilians should be struck by those rockets and you don't try and eliminate them? No. What Israel does is it issues these warnings in Arabic, on cell phones, on landlines, sometimes in writing, warns the people to leave the house, so we will destroy the house with the rockets, with the munitions inside it. No other army exercises such care at limiting civilian casualties on the other side.
Now, what do you think is behind this escalation from Hamas right now at this time?
Well, I clearly am not a Hamas spokesman, and I'm not going to try and anticipate what's in their mind, but looking at their situation, you can see that when the Muslim Brotherhood was in power in Egypt, Hamas was in a strengthened situation. After all, Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now that General Sisi is ruling Egypt, General Sisi has clamped down on Hamas and, of course, on the Muslim Brotherhood. His Arab allies, like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, are also moving against the Muslim Brotherhood and hence cutting off Hamas. And Hamas may be seeking new allies by pursuing this war. It could be that they want to attach themselves to some of the jihadist organizations that are now active in the Levant, like ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra. But that's a bit speculative, but one thing that can't be ruled out.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gold, for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline.
Coming up, living on the front lines, how one Israeli community is always prepared for the worst. In the past few weeks, hundreds of rockets have been fired from Gaza into central and southern Israel. But it's a conflict that's been going on since the year 2001. CBN's Scott Ross visited Sderot, just a half a mile from the Gaza border, to find out what daily life is like under the constant threat of rocket attack.
They call it Rocket Town, the bomb shelter capital of the world. For more than a decade, Israelis in Sderot and southern Israel have lived under almost daily rocket attacks from the Gaza Strip.
Is this representative of what you're dealing with here all the time?
The truth is, this is a very small fractions of the rockets themselves that exploded here in the region itself.
You have people getting killed here in your town?
We had over 44 people been killed overall by rocket fire. Over 1,200 been seriously injured. At the same time, you have an entire generation that grew up with this kind of reality of sirens going off.
David Buskila was born and raised in Sderot and has been the city's mayor for 14 years.
You love this town, you love the people?
Of course.
Yes.
Someone that not love this town cannot live here.
Day by day, you have to deal with this lifestyle where rockets are being showered literally upon you. How does one adjust to that, if you ever do, really?
In April 2001, it was the first missile that launched to this city. Since then, we had more than 8,000 missiles.
8,000?
8,000 missiles that land only in Sderot. It's a little town, 5.5 square kilometers. 25,000 people live here. And you can imagine that 8,000 hit almost every apartment, every house in this city.
Buskila says many Israelis here suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. The mayor took me to a hill on the edge of town where we could see just how close the Gaza Strip is.
This is the border. It's 840 meters. It's, the meaning is something like half a mile.
They could fire rockets at these towers and knock them down, and
they launch rockets to the electric power station.
Yes, you supply Gaza.
We gave them electric, and they launch rockets to break the electric power station, and then to complain that they have darkness in Gaza. You see, this is not normal.
Everyone who drives in Sderot turns off the radio and rolls the windows down, ready to hear the color red siren to make a mad dash for safety.
And here I am in a playground where kids come and play. Here's a caterpillar, and anywhere else in the world, this would be a normal caterpillar. However, this is a bit different. This is, in fact, a bomb shelter. So when kids come out here to play, a siren goes off. They have 15 seconds to get inside here to be protected from falling bombs. How does this environment affect children as they're growing up?
Only yesterday I was talking to one of my friends that her a boy is in our kindergarten too. We had 2 alarms yesterday or the day before, I don't remember. And he was so panicked that she had to get out of work and come and get him. And he is only 2 years old.
Hagar Aloni is Sderot's social worker.
We have to be aware of where a bomb shelter is, right?
Right there, yeah.
Okay, tell me where to run in case something lands here.
Nothing moved me more than meeting Geut Aragon. In January 2008, she was sitting in her home with her 4-year-old son Nir and a neighbor child on her lap. A rocket crashed through the room where they were sitting.
The bomb come through the wall into the room. All the roof was crushed on us from the, how you say it?
Explosion.
Yeah, the explosion. The girl was, fly to the corner. There was 4 shrapnels in my head.
Yeah.
And they operated and they took out 3 of them, but one of them, it get deep into the brain, so they don't want to touch it.
Geut was in rehab for a year and a half, but that wasn't the end of her trouble. Nearly 5 years later, her son is still afraid to sleep in his room. The family has to run to the bomb shelter sometimes 3 times a night. So why does she stay?
It's my country, it's my city. I'm born here.
Right.
I love it. If you want to move, you need to sell the house. No one wants to buy a house in Sderot. No one wants to come from outside to live under bombing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to tell you, even that, we very love this city.
How does it affect you now when you hear the rockets landing? Because they're still shooting them here.
Every time I heard the siren, it takes me back then.
Yeah.
And when I go down to the shelter, I'm sitting and I start crying every time and again.
Do you believe that God protected you?
Yeah.
You do believe that?
I believe that, yeah.
You're not angry? Totally. You're not angry with God because He allowed it to happen?
No. I think now, and I thought back then, that it was a miracle, and He protected on me, and He leaves me here in this world, living for my boys, because, and I thank Him every morning. I never was that believer, you know?
No.
But since day, I believe more in God.
Scott Ross, CBN, Sderot, Israel.
When we return, another look at Operation Protective Edge. Well, in just 10 days, there's been 500,000 downloads of the free app Red Alert. It's a great reminder to pray for the situation here in Israel. Well, that's it for this edition. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.